friends. I'm Deepak Kannal and we are meeting again to discuss the different issues pertaining to aesthetics and philosophy for the postgraduate course in visual arts. In the previous session, we talked about structuralism and the structuralist theories. Considering the limitations of structuralism, some scholars tried to comment on it, and that phase is known as post-structural period. Today, we are planning to discuss post-structuralism. Post-structuralism is what is referred to as the theoretical movement which grew out of structuralist theories. The trend towards post-structuralism occurred because of some problems with structuralist thought. Structuralism was, according to some critics, and some of its proponents are historical. If structures are always already there, then what about class struggle or feminist struggle in the context of this theoretical framework? How do we account for social and cultural changes? Structuralist thought, with the overall categorization of binaries in myths and other media, seem to be forgetting the socio-economic realities as the level of societies that create these myths in the first place. In addition, structuralism often assumes the presence of an ideal reader or viewer and doesn't take the experience of actual readers or viewers into account. Many of the same theorists who had worked in structuralist thought now preferred post-structuralist modes, and despite a tremendous diversity of perspectives, post-structuralists share some fundamental assumptions about language, meaning and subjectivity. So, it was at some point in late 1960s, structuralism gave birth to post-structuralism. Some theorists seem to think that later developments were already inherent in the earlier phase. Post-structuralism is simply a fuller working out of the implications of structuralism. Post-structuralism tries to deflate the scientific stable pretension of structuralism. It is possible to see the beginning of a post-structuralist counter-movement even in Saussure's linguistic theory. Language in Saussure is the systematic aspect of language which works as the underpinning structure of parole, the individual instance of speech or writing. Sign is about bipartite, signifier and signified. However, Saussure also noticed that there is no necessary connection between signifier and signified. Sometimes a language will have one word, signifier, for two concepts, signifies. One word can have multiple meanings. It is as though the various languages carve up the word of things and ideas into different concepts, the signifiers, on one hand, and different words, signifiers, on the other. As Saussure puts it, a linguistic system is a series of differences of sound combined with a series of differences of ideas. The signifier hot is able to work as a part of a sign because it differs from hat, it, hop, hog, lot, and so on. These differences can be aligned with different signifiers. He concludes, in language, there are only differences without positive terms. However, before we jump to the wrong conclusions, he immediately adds that this is only true if we take signifiers and signifieds separately. Signifier-signified relationship is arbitrary. Speakers in practice require particular signifiers to be securely attached to particular concepts, and therefore they assume that signifier and signified form a unified whole and preserve a certain identity of meaning. Post-structuralist thought has discovered the essentially unstable nature of signification. the sign is not so much a unit with two sides as a momentary fix between two moving layers. Saussure has recognized that signifier and signified are two separate systems, but he did not see how unstable units of meaning can be when the systems come together. Having established language as a total system independent of physical reality, he tried to retain a sense of science, coherence, even though his splitting on the sign into two parts threatening to undo it. Post-structuralists have in various ways taken apart the two halves of the sign. The Russian linguist Mikhail Bakhtin pointed out some of these problems early on, arguing against a static ahistorical model of structures. Bakhtin's life as a scholar was marked by political upheaval, and he addressed the social and cultural issues raised by the Russian Revolution and Stalinism. For Bakhtin, language was always ideological. It was always rooted in struggle and social conditions of speaking. Bakhtin says that theories of language have always postulated an isolated single speaker whose utterances create unique meanings. He calls this monologic language because it seems to come from a single unified source and contrasts it with heteroglossia, the multiple forms of speech that people use in the course of their daily lives. So for example, one may have very different ways of speaking with the random people that one encounters in daily life. From the waiter who takes your breakfast order to the police officer who stops you from speeding. These different ways of speaking use different vocabularies, language registers, sentence structures, accents, even tones of voice. Monologic language requires one standard language, an official language that everyone would be forced to speak. Heteroglossic language, on the other hand, tends to be a moving language towards multiplicity by including a wide variety of different ways of speaking, different rhetorical strategies and vocabularies. Both heteroglossia and monologia, Bakhtin says, are always at work in any utterance. This concept is critical for helping us to recognize, value and interpret the different ways of speaking in relations to and via the visual art, whether it is a study of fine arts, craft or any form of expression. Post-structuralists further argue that structures aren't some kind of universal, timeless truth just waiting to be uncovered, but they are as structures are fictions that we create in order to be able to interpret the world around us. Julia Kristeva argued that a text, a cultural practice, is not a structure but a process of structuration. Similarly, Jacques Derrida, an important post-structuralist theorist, says, in text, structures are really dependent on the conventions of writers. For post-structuralism, meaning is a lot less stable than structuralism would suggest. Post-structuralism emphasizes the constant slippage in the play of signs, in the relations between signifier and signifier. Post-structuralism has important implications for the practice of history and art history. Post-structuralist historians argue that history isn't just waiting out there to be found in documents and images. When we write history, the context that is important is not only the past but also the present, which conditions what we find and how we interpret it. Art historian Norman Bryson has pointed out that the evidence for historical interpretation is vast, potentially limitless. With such multiple contexts and various interpretations possible, only certain concepts and interpretations can be highlighted at a time. Foucault's work is very important when it comes to mechanics behind the creation of structures. Michel Foucault, 1926 to 1984, was a French historian, philosopher, and post-structuralist theorist who has had a profound influence on the humanities and the social science since the late 60s. For him, history is the understanding of the genealogy of the present. We don't trace from the past to the present, but the other way around, examining the choices and accidents that resulted in the present. There is no model of progress. There are no continuities. History is a process of leaps, gaps, ruptures, and disjunctures. And the task of the historian is to focus on these. History is about asking who are we in terms of our knowledge of ourselves, about inquiring into the political forces that shape us, and investigating the sense of our relationship to ourselves, the ethical choices we make to govern these internal relationships. Focused on the effects of power in society, how it acts, who has access to it. He felt that it was ordinary people who were caught in the web of power relations. Foucault's work focused on topics in European history that hadn't even been framed in quite this way. The history of sexuality, the history of prison, the history of insanity. Though power is an important concept for Foucault, it is elusive and not easily defined, taking on multiple associations and meanings in different works. Power is hard to grasp conceptually because it is itself plural, fragmentary, and indeterminate. At its core, for Foucault, power is a multiple and mobile field of force relations where far-reaching but never completely stable effects of dominations are produced. At the same time, it is historically and spatially specific, working through normative values, social institutions, and politics. Moreover, power isn't only at issue in the state of the law. It permeates all aspects of society and all relations, from the economic to the spiritual, sexual, or artistic. Focus in particular on the idea of discourse or discursive practices. How do we present and use knowledge in society? How does knowledge relate to power? How power is invested in particular institutions, theories, and ideologies? The Archaeology of Knowledge, 1974, explores the conditions that allow discourses to develop. This concept of discourses include not only texts, terminologies, images, and concepts, but also cultural practices and artifacts such as maps, calculations, and experiments. For Foucault, discourse is always inseparable from power because discourse is the governing and ordering medium of every institution. Discourse determines what it is possible to say, what are the criteria of truth, who is allowed to speak with authority, and where such speech can be spoken. Roland Barthes is an important French theorist of the 60s and the 70s. Barthes stresses the process of signification, which appears less and less predictable as his work proceeds. The worst sin a writer can commit is to pretend that language is a natural, transparent medium through which the reader grasps a solid and unified truth or reality. He says, the virtuous writer recognizes the artifice of writing and proceeds to make play with it. Avant-garde writers allow the unconscious of language to rise to the surface. They allow the signifiers to generate meanings at will and to undermine the censorship of the signified and its repressive insistence on one meaning. In Elements of Semiology, 1967, he believed that structuralist method would explain all the sign system of human culture. However, in the very same text, he recognized that structuralist discourse itself would become the object of explanation. The semiological investigators regarded his or her own language as a second order discourse which operates upon the first order object language. The second order language is called meta-language. In realizing that any meta-language could be put into position of a first order language and be interrogated by another meta-language, Barthes glimpses at indefinite egress and aporia which destroys the authority of all meta-languages. This means that when we read as critiques, there will never be a position outside language that is not subject to another analysis or reading. All discourses, including critical interpretations, are equally fictive. None stands apart in the place of truth as such. Barthes' short essay, The Death of an Author, is post-structuralist in its rejection of the traditional view that the author is the origin of the text, the source of its meaning, and the only authority for interpretation. The author becomes just like a location or a crossroad where language, like the flowing infinite of citation, repetition, echoes and references, crosses and recrosses. The reader is thus free to enter the text from any direction. There is no correct route. The death of the author is already inherent in structuralism, which treats individual utterances, that is paroles, as the product of impersonal system, that is langue. What is new in Barthes is the idea that readers are free to open and close the text's signifying process without respect for the signified. Barthes' S.Z. 1970 is also another post-structuralist text. He begins by showing the main ambitions of structuralist narratologists who try to see all the world stories within a single structure. The attempt to uncover the structure is vain because each text possesses a difference. This difference is not a sort of uniqueness but the result of textuality itself. Each text refers back differently to the infinite sea of already written, like Kristeva's intertextuality. Some writings would discourage the reader from freely reconnecting text and they're already written by insisting on specific meanings and references. Other texts encourage the reader to produce meanings. The I, which reads the already itself a plurality of other texts and is allowed by the avant-garde text the maximum liberty to produce meanings by putting what is read in touch with the plurality. The first type of text allows the reader only to be a consumer of fixed meaning, while the second turns the reader into a producer. The first type of text is called readerly, that is legible. The second, writerly, that is scriptable. The first is made to be consumed, the second to be written, produced. The writerly text exists only in theory, though Barthes' description of it suggests the text of modernism. The ideal text is a galaxy of signifiers, not a structure of signifiers. It has no beginning. We gain access to it by several entrances, none of which can be authoritatively declared to be the main one. Both structuralism and post-structuralism have been quite influential within art history, especially as their development has coincided with an interest in semiotics and issues of social context. In some ways, elements of structuralist thought have long been present in art history. Heinrich Wölffling's use of binary opposition to perform visual analysis, that is linear to Painterly or open and closed form, can be a good example. Post-structuralism in particular has required a different way of thinking about art, representation and mimesis, the imitation of reality. Post-structuralist theories of language have argued there is no obvious or necessary connection between language and what it refers to. Such relationships are cultural, based on human choices and conventions. Post-structural theories and art historians have extended such arguments to the visual arts too. For example, Camera Lucida, Reflections on Photography by Roland Barthes, is an eloquent meditation on portrait photography and the relationship between the photographs as signifier and the sitter as the signifier. Barthes notes the peculiar way in which we do not separate the photographic representation from the person represented. As Keith Moffat in The Practice of Theory, Post-Structuralism, Cultural Politics and Art History, published in 1994, visual forms are not mimetic. They are not a means by which the artist captures the quality of the real world. Instead, visual forms are value-laden interpretations of the world which vary from culture to culture and period to period. Although art history has traditionally taken a single artist work, a period or a culture as its focus, post-structuralism points out the artificiality of those interpretative frames, even though they may seem natural or inevitable. It may be more provocative to trace a particular motive or a practice such as iconoclasm, or to group artists or images in new ways. In post-structuralist art history, instead of simply cataloging an artist's influences to see what works from the past or present interest her, the focus shifts to asking why he or she is choosing particular artists and images, asking that he or she is seeking to do in reusing and reworking visual images in his or her present context, and tracing the effect of these choices on the viewer. Foucault's ideas about power, the political technologies of body, sexuality, and the nature of history have had a strong impact on art historical practices. Although Foucault is primarily associated with literature, philosophy, and history, it did write about art. One approach to examine arts institutions such as museums and art galleries, just as Foucault examines mental hospitals and prisons. Nicholas Mirzoeff draws on Foucault's work to trace the body scheme, the body as a cluster or multiple flexible signs, to explain how different versions of the ideal figure have been created in art.